All right, so today we're going to dive into a concept that might feel a little unsettling. It's called the misused Messiah. And no, this isn't about history or theology. This is about a pattern, a blueprint that might just be hardwired into your own brain.
So let's just kick things off with a pretty provocative question. What if the biggest deceptions, the ones we fall for the hardest, aren't coming from the outside world? What if the most dangerous lie is actually an ancient pattern hiding inside your own head? And to be absolutely crystal clear here, we are not talking about religion. We're talking about biology. We are going straight into the neuroscience of why our brains, yours and mine, are so incredibly susceptible to certain kinds of stories.
So when you hear Misused Messiah, I want you to think of it as a neurological blueprint. It's this reoccurring pattern, this biological tendency we all have to look for and believe in stories that promise someone or something is going to come along and save us.
But why? Why is this pattern so powerful? Well, it turns out our brains are basically hardwired to crave a savior. And to understand why, we've got to look at how the brain manages its most precious resource, energy.
The thing you have to understand is that your brain's #1 goal above almost everything else is efficiency. I mean, this thing is a massive energy hog. It burns about 20% of your body's total energy. So it is constantly, and I mean constantly, looking for shortcuts to save fuel. And this quote just hits the nail on the head. Grappling with complex problems, sitting with uncertainty, actually figuring things out for yourself, that is hard work for the brain. It burns a ton of calories. So your brain has this built-in bias to outsource salvation. It's not a moral failing or a character flaw, it's just biology.
So how does the brain get us to do this again and again? Well, the answer is dopamine. Now, most of us think of dopamine as just the pleasure molecule, right? But it's actually more of a teaching signal. Think of it like a little yellow highlighter pen. When you do something your brain likes, it releases dopamine to highlight that action and say, hey, pay attention, that was good, do that again. And here's where it all connects. When we're presented with a simple story that offers a total solution, what the source material calls maximal closure, our brain's reward system goes wild. It sees this easy answer, this perfect shortcut, and rewards us with a huge hit of dopamine. It's basically telling us, yes, you found the ultimate energy-saving hack.
Okay, so we're wired to find a savior. Got it. But what's really wild is how this ancient blueprint, this same basic pattern, just keeps showing up over and over again in totally different parts of our modern lives.
Now, there's a fancy term for this, structural isomorphism. Yeah, I know, it's a mouthful, but it just means same shape. The idea is that the narrative skeleton, the basic structure of the story, stays exactly the same even if you change all the details. The form is identical, even when the content is completely different.
And that skeleton has 4 key beats. First, you get the promise, some kind of amazing, all-encompassing solution. Then comes the following, where your own identity starts to merge with the idea or the movement. Third is the reinforcement, where the community and those dopamine hits lock you in. And finally, you get the crash, that moment when the promise fails, or you just double down and refuse to admit it failed.
In this table, man, this is where it all just clicks into place. You can see that same shape in action. The promise of transcendent salvation in religion looks an awful lot like the tech world's promise to end scarcity with AI, which sounds a lot like a politician's vow to reclaim the soul of the nation. The costumes change, but the script is exactly the same.
So that brings us to the really tricky part. Once we've bought into one of these narratives, why is it so ridiculously hard to change our minds? I mean, even when the evidence is staring us right in the face? Well, you guessed it. The answer is back in our biology. Logically, you'd think that when we see new data that contradicts our beliefs, we'd just update our beliefs. Simple, right? But that's not what happens biologically. When your brain gets information that conflicts with a deeply held dopamine-reinforced belief, it doesn't register it as a learning opportunity. It registers it as a threat. It actually triggers a cognitive pain signal. It literally hurts. And because it hurts, your brain throws up this whole fortress of defenses to protect you from that pain. Confirmation bias isn't just a simple mistake. It's your brain actively seeking out info that feels good and avoiding info that hurts. You get the Dunning-Kruger effect, where we become absolutely convinced we did our own research.
And then social contagion just pours gasoline on the fire, as these beliefs spread like a virus through our social groups, making us even more polarized.
Okay, I know this all sounds pretty bleak. It can feel like we're just puppets of our own biology, but it's not hopeless. The good news is, by understanding this blueprint, we can actually learn to spot it and start to reclaim our own agency.
So here are 3 huge red flags you can start looking for. First, be wary of anything that promises effortless transformation. Real change is messy and hard. If it sounds way too easy, it's probably just hacking your brain's desire for a shortcut. Second, watch out for the demonization of dissent. Healthy ideas can handle questions. Fragile ones treat any question as a personal attack. And third, be suspicious of any insistence on a single, exclusive truth, the idea that this is the only way.
And here's your toolkit for fighting back. Number 1, recognize the rush. That feeling of absolute certainty, that aha, this is it moment. Learn to pause and see it for what it is, a dopamine signal, not proof of truth. Number 2, practice deliberate disconfirmation. This one's tough. You have to actively seek out the smartest, most compelling arguments against your own position. 3, embrace discomfort. The world is uncertain. Learning to sit with that feeling instead of rushing to a simple answer is a genuine superpower. And finally, number 4, accept personal responsibility. This is about shifting from waiting for someone else to fix things to doing the hard, messy, but ultimately meaningful work yourself.
And really, this all boils down to one crucial idea. We spend so much time and energy trying to spot the charlatans and false prophets out there in the world. But the real battle, the greatest challenge, is internal. It's about recognizing that split second when your own biology, in its desperate search for an easy answer, tries to crown a messiah of its own.
Which leaves us with one final question to think about. If this ancient blueprint is always running in the background, always pushing you towards the simplest, most efficient story, then who really is writing your story? Is it you? Or is it your brain's relentless, ancient desire for a shortcut?